On August 14, 2012, a blind 18-year-old boy named Zach Paul arrived at Yosemite National Park with his father. It was to be an important test of independence. Zach wanted to prove that he could hike a simple route without the help of people. He had to hike just 1 mile while his father waited in the parking lot. His only guide and eyes was a golden retriever named Barney. But the short walk turned into a tragedy. The boy and his dog disappeared into the woods without a trace, leaving no sign. Exactly 2 years later, Barney returned. Exhausted, dirty, and with his fur straying, he came out to the tourists. But people froze in horror, not because of the dog's condition, but because of something he was carefully holding in his teeth. It was a human hand, the dried bones of his owner's hand. You will find out who hurt the defenseless boy, where the dog had been missing for 2 years, and how his loyalty helped solve the murder in this video. Enjoy the video. On August 14, 2012, it was the height of the dry season in Yosemite National Park. The air was thick with heat and the smell of pine needles, and the temperature in the valley had already risen above 25 degrees Celsius in the morning. On this particular day, a family SUV pulled up in the parking lot at the beginning of the McGurk Meadow Trail, and 2 people got out: a middle-aged man, Michael Paul, and his 18-year-old son, Zach. For an outsider, it looked like a normal start to a family vacation, but for the Paul family, this morning was to be a decisive moment in the boy's life. Zach has been blind since birth. In the fall, he was to start studying at a specialized college far away from home, so for the past few months, he had been insistently demanding more freedom from his parents. He wanted to prove that he was able to navigate his way around without constant supervision. After many family meetings and arguments, his father agreed to a compromise. Zach would hike a short and technically easy stretch of the mountain alone, with only his faithful guide dog, a golden retriever named Barney. The route to McGurk's hut was not chosen by chance. It was a wide, well-trodden path exactly 1 mile long, with no sharp changes in elevation or dangerous cliffs. According to the plan, Zach was to walk to an old wooden hut, rest there, and return the same way. His father's condition was strict and categorical. The boy had a portable radio in his pocket and was obliged to get in touch every 15 minutes. Michael stayed by the car at the start of the route, ready to take off at the first hint of danger. At 10 o'clock and 15 minutes, Zach fastened a special harness with a rigid handle on Barney, checked the radio charge, and confidently set foot on the trail. The dog, who had undergone a full course of training for guide dogs, was calm and focused. Michael watched his son until he disappeared around the first bend in the trail, which was hidden among the centuries-old pines. The first communication session took place at 10:30 sharp. Zach's voice sounded cheerful and clear without any interference. He reported that he had completed the first quarter of a mile. The ground was smooth underfoot, and Barney was doing a great job of avoiding tree roots. His father replied briefly, trying not to show his excitement, and looked at his watch again. At 10:45, the walkie-talkie came to life again. Zach confirmed that he had made it halfway across the country, was hearing birds singing, and enjoying his independence. That was the last time Michael heard his son's voice. When the clock struck 11 o'clock, the airwaves remained silent. Michael waited another minute, chalking up the delay to the fact that his son might have stopped for a drink of water or simply lost track of time. At 11:02, he pressed the call button himself, but all he heard was the steady white noise of static. The father called his son for 5 minutes, and with each passing second, the silence became more and more depressing. At 11:10, breaking the agreement to stay put, Michael took off running down the path deep into the forest. He covered the mile to the hut in less than 15 minutes, out of breath from running and fear. Along the way, he stopped all the tourists he met, showing them a photo of his son on his phone. A group of tourists from Germany confirmed that they had seen a blind boy with a golden retriever. According to them, the young man was walking confidently, the dog was walking beside him, but this meeting took place before 11 o'clock. When Michael reached the final point of the route, the historic McGurk cabin, it was empty. No Zach, no Barney, no trace of them. It was as if the forest had swallowed them. Realizing that his son had not just lost his radio, but had disappeared physically, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the father reached the nearest ranger station. A large-scale search operation began immediately. The status of missing with disability gave the case the highest priority. Until sunset, the area was combed by Park Service dog teams, professional trackers, and dozens of volunteers. The main difficulty was that if Zach went off the trail, he could not see visual cues such as smoke, lights, or rescue flares. He could only rely on his ears, but the sound of the wind in the treetops and the noise of mountain streams created acoustic traps. The search dogs picked up Zach's trail in the middle of the route, but it did not lead to the hut, but turned sharply to the side into dense bushes and broke off at the exit to a rocky plateau where the wind blew away all the scents. On the third day of the search, August 17th, an event occurred that brought only new questions instead of answers. One of the volunteers, combing the Bravo sector 300 yards from the main trail, found a trekking pole. It was a folding stick with red markings that Zach had used to check the ground in front of him. The detectives were struck by its position. The stick wasn't lying on the ground, as is the case when an item is lost. It was standing, neatly leaning against the trunk of a thick pine tree in an upright position. It looked as if someone had deliberately left it there, planning to return, or it was a sign from someone. The area around was covered with dense manzanita bushes, where a blind man could not have walked in accidentally without noticing the sudden change in the ground under his feet. No dog tracks, signs of a struggle, or other equipment were found nearby. The active phase of the search lasted exactly 2 weeks. Helicopters equipped with thermal imagers took to the skies, scanning the Dewey Point area and the steep slopes along Bridal Veil Creek. However, the dense crown of redwoods and huge granite boulders created hundreds of blind spots where the equipment was powerless. On August 30th, the operation was officially transferred to passive monitoring status. The final report from the Mariposa County Sheriff's Office stated dryly, "No signs of life, clothing, or biological remains were found. The search is critically hampered by the lack of visual contact from the missing person." A bold experiment in independence turned into a tragedy. Zach Paul and his dog Barney disappeared into the majestic forests of Yosemite, leaving his parents, who were grieving, with only a lone stick under a tree. On August 23, 2014, exactly 2 years and 9 days after Zach Paul's mysterious disappearance, the summer tourist season in Yosemite National Park was in full swing. The Glacier Point Lookout, which offers one of the most famous views of the valley and waterfalls, was still empty. The tour buses were due to arrive in just over an hour, so the morning silence reigned around us, broken only by the sound of the wind. At 7 o'clock, 40 minutes in the morning, Alvin Gregg, an employee of the Sierra Park Services Maintenance Company, began his usual shift. His task was to check and open the bear-proof trash cans located near the gift shop. This location is just a few miles in a straight line from the start of the same fateful McGurk Meadow Trail, where the missing boy was last seen. According to an official statement Alvin later gave to police, he was just finishing up the first tank inspection when he heard a strange rustling in the dense manzanita bushes growing near the edge of the asphalt parking lot. The sound resembled the footsteps of a large animal trying to break through the stiff branches. The man tensed up, expecting to see a black bear or a cougar, and instinctively reached for the radio on his belt to inform the dispatcher of the potential threat. However, what stepped out of the thicket into the sunlight made him freeze. It was a dog, or rather, a creature that had once been a pet dog. It was a golden retriever, but its appearance was truly terrible and pitiful. The once luxurious golden coat had been stuck together in dense, stone-hard tangles covered with a layer of dirt, dried resin, and pine needles. Ribs protruded through the dirty skin, and the spine stood out sharply on the back. On the animal's left side was an old, wide scar that had not healed well and was probably the result of a serious injury in the past. The animal was moving slowly, with its head bowed to the ground and limping heavily on its right hind leg. At first, Alvin thought it was a sick coyote or a feral dog that might be carrying rabies, so he cautiously began to back away. But the dog was not aggressive and did not try to run away. He walked to the asphalt footpath, sat down heavily a few yards away from the man, and put the object he had been carefully holding in his teeth on the ground. The first report, written by the rangers who arrived at the scene at 8:15, describes the situation in a dry but eerie way. The found animal shows signs of extreme physical exhaustion and dehydration, but is behaving calmly. The object brought by the animal from the forest area has been preliminarily identified as a fragment of human biological remains. It was a human hand. There was almost no soft tissue or flesh left. The bones were dry and yellowed from prolonged exposure to sun, wind, and time, but the dried tendons still held them together in the correct anatomical order. The most frightening part of this discovery was an object that shone faintly on the phalanx of the ring finger of the bone hand. It was a wide silver ring with a blackened finish. The arrival of senior dog handlers and a veterinarian at the scene allowed for immediate identification of the dog. A portable microchip scanner produced a long electronic code, which was instantly checked against the database of missing animals. The result confirmed what the rangers had already begun to guess based on the dog's breed. It was Barney, Zach Paul's certified guide dog. The dog, who disappeared without a trace with his owner 2 years ago, returned on his own. A detailed veterinary examination conducted the same day revealed a strange and disturbing discrepancy. Despite critical emaciation, numerous abrasions and scars, the dog's teeth and stomach contents pointed to an unexpected fact. Barney had not eaten any scraps, carrion or small rodents during these 2 years. His teeth were in too good a condition for wildlife in the forest. The veterinarian concluded that the dog had indeed been starving for the last few days or a week, covering a long distance, but until then, someone or something had kept him alive by providing regular food. This meant that the dog hadn't been wandering the Yosemite forests all this time. The bone Barney brought in was immediately packed in a sterile container and sent by special transport to the state's main crime lab in Sacramento. A preliminary visual analysis by the coroner at the scene confirmed that the size and stage of decomposition of the remains could be that of a young male. Experts carefully cleaned the silver ring from dirt. On the inside of the jewelry, they found a clear machine engraving, the initials ZP. There was no doubt it was Zach Paul's hand. Barney returned from the woods not just as the only surviving witness to the tragedy. By doing so, he brought the investigators the only indisputable proof of his master's death, turning a missing persons case into a murder investigation. Now the detectives faced a new, even more difficult task: to understand exactly where the dog found these remains and where he had been for 2 years before he decided to come to people on Glacier Point. On August 25, 2014, a detailed report from the Sacramento-based Center for Criminalistics Research landed on the desk of the chief investigator at the Mariposa County Sheriff's Office. The eagerly awaited document consisted of 3 parts: the results of genetic testing, the conclusions of a forensic anthropologist, and a report from the Trace Evidence Department. The first page brought the final, albeit expected, news that shattered the family's last faint hope. The DNA profile extracted from the bone marrow of the found hand matched Zach Paul's genetic material by 99 9/10%. However, the real shock came from the anthropologist's findings. The specialist, having studied the condition of the bone tissue, found that the young man's death occurred in August 2012, probably in the first days or even hours after his disappearance. But the most frightening discovery was the microscopic marks on the bones of the wrist. The expert found deep, characteristic furrows and abrasions on the radius and ulna. These injuries could not have been caused by a fall, hitting stones, or wildlife activity. The conclusion was unequivocal. These were the marks of a lifelong, extremely tight binding. Someone had held the boy by force, tying his hands with coarse rope or wire. This fact instantly changed the qualification of the case. It was no longer a search for a missing person from an accident. Now the detectives were investigating a kidnapping and murder with particular brutality. But, as is often the case in the most complex investigations, the key to the solution was not in the body itself, but in what was left on it. Geological experts drew attention to a specific kind of dirt that was deeply embedded in the pores of the bone and was also found in large quantities under Barney's claws and in his fur. It was a fine dust of a rich reddish-brown hue. Laboratory spectral analysis identified this substance as terra rossa, a red clay rich in iron oxides. For the experienced rangers and geologists who knew the area well, this conclusion came as a bolt from the blue. Yosemite National Park, especially in the area of the high plateaus and the McGurk Meadow Trail, is geologically composed primarily of light gray granite and quartz sand. There are simply no red clay deposits there. The presence of such soil on the remains and on the dog was a geological anomaly that pointed to a specific geographical fact. Both the dog and the boy's body had been in a completely different location for a long time. Geologists outlined the search area. Red clay is a characteristic feature of the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountain system, but it is found at much lower altitudes, usually below 2,000 feet above sea level. This is the so-called gold mine zone, where numerous gold mines, quarries, and mining settlements were located in the 19th century. This area lies to the west of the national park's borders, in a remote, mountainous area covered with dense brush. In parallel with the forensic scientists, the veterinarian who examined Barney submitted his report. His findings perfectly complemented the geological picture and helped reconstruct the dog's path. The doctor noted that the pads of the retriever's paws were not just damaged. They were worn down to the meat, and the same red clay was baked into the deep cracks. The animal's muscles were hard and clogged with lactic acid, indicating a long, exhausting physical activity that bordered on the limits of the body's capabilities. Putting all the pieces together, the investigation came up with a startling picture of events. No one brought Barney to the Glacier Point observation deck. The dog had indeed escaped from his place of confinement. Guided by his phenomenal instinct and memory, he walked dozens of miles over rough terrain. But the most important thing is that he was going up. The animal was climbing from the lowlands of the foothills, where the soil is red and viscous, back into the high mountains, to the familiar smells of the coniferous forest and the coolness of Yosemite, where he was last happy with his owner. The dog didn't just escape. He brought the map of the crime with him. He literally pulled the evidence from the place where the body was hidden. Investigators realized the fatal mistake of the previous 2 years. All this time, they had been looking for Zach within a few miles of the disappearance, combing the forests and gorges of the park. But the boy had never been lost in the forest. He was taken out of the park on the same day. Now the vector of the investigation has turned 180 degrees. The police stopped searching in the mountains and directed all resources to the west, to the area of abandoned quarries and old mines, where the ground is the color of rust and blood. It was there, in the red zone, that the answer to what had happened to Zach Paul was to be found. On September 7, 2014, armed with the results of a geological examination, police analysts and rangers were able to narrow the search area critically. Instead of the vast forests of the park, their attention was now focused on a specific sector on the map, an area of abandoned quarries near the small town of El Portal, located west of the official boundaries of the reserve. Among local residents and law enforcement, this area had an unofficial but eloquent name: the Dead Zone. It was a gloomy place where tourists with cameras never entered. There were old technical dirt roads that had long since been washed away by rain, and the hillsides were scarred by the remains of industrial activity from the last century. Rusty frames of abandoned machinery, dilapidated fences, and plots of private property that even the owners had forgotten about after the gold mines closed were visible everywhere. It was here that the soil had the same characteristic blood-red hue found on the bones. Helicopter reconnaissance conducted the next day confirmed the investigators' suspicions. The pilot spotted an old residential trailer in one of the remote areas, hidden from view by dense shrubbery and a hill. Next to it was a dilapidated wooden shed surrounded by an improvised fence made of rusty iron sheets and barbed wire. On official satellite images taken several years ago, the place looked like an empty spot with no signs of human activity. Now, however, a narrow but well-trodden path was clearly visible from the air, leading from the barn door right into the thick of the forest. Someone lived here, and that someone was trying very hard to remain unnoticed. On September 10, 2014, a Special Forces group together with leading detectives began an operation to enter the suspicious territory. Moving as quietly as possible, the officers surrounded the perimeter, expecting possible armed resistance. However, an assault was not necessary. The yard looked abandoned, and the silence was broken only by the creaking of metal sheets in the wind. During the initial inspection of the territory, right next to the barn wall, the operatives came across an object that made the dog handler's heart sink. It was a crude, makeshift dog kennel made of rotten boards and pieces of plywood. A heavy, rusty chain was attached to a crutch hammered into the wall. At its end hung a torn fragment of an old leather collar. Experts immediately took soil samples around the kennel. The ground here was trampled by the paws of an animal that had been walking in a circle for years on a leash, and it was saturated with the same red clay. The size of the collar and the radius of the trampled ground perfectly matched the dimensions of the golden retriever. This was Barney's place of imprisonment. But the most terrible discovery was made a little further away. While combing the perimeter, one of the officers descended into a shallow ravine about 50 yards from the barn. The ravine was half filled with construction debris, broken bricks, slate, and bags of cement. It was under this layer of debris, in a place where the soil had been washed away by recent rainstorms and probably dug up by wild animals, that the search team found the grave. It was a careless, very shallow grave. The killer did not bother to hide the body securely. He simply covered it with earth and debris, relying on the remoteness of the place. Forensic experts confirmed the presence of human remains, which were at the stage of severe skeletalization. At the first examination, a gruesome detail became apparent. The skeleton was missing its right hand. This finally connected the discovery in the ravine with what the dog had brought to Glacier Point. In addition to the bones, fragments of clothing were found in the grave that had miraculously survived. These were the remains of a blue synthetic jacket of a well-known brand and one heavy hiking boot. The description of these items matched exactly what Zach Paul was wearing on the day he disappeared. However, the evidence base would not have been complete without the findings inside the barn itself. When the detectives entered the room, they were struck by chaos. The barn was crammed to the brim with all kinds of junk. It resembled the lair of a pathological collector: old rusty tools, coils of copper wire, household appliances disassembled for parts, and stacks of old newspapers. It seems that the owner had an obsessive habit of dragging home everything he found in dumpsters or stole, carefully sorting it into useful and spare parts. On one of the dusty wooden shelves, among the cans of nails, there was an ordinary cardboard box with one word written on it in black marker: electronics. The gloved detective carefully opened it. Inside, among the old TV remotes, broken cell phones from the early 2000s, and tangled chargers, was an object that stood out for its color. It was a portable radio of bright yellow color. It was in poor condition, the back cover was missing, and the battery compartment was empty. For the owner of this lair, it was just another piece of equipment from which he took out the batteries for his own needs and threw the case into a box for the future. But when the investigator turned the device over and shone a flashlight on the sticker under the battery compartment, he saw the serial number. It took a few seconds to check it against the documents Zach's parents had provided 2 years ago. The numbers matched perfectly. It was the same walkie-talkie Zach had last used to talk to his father. It had gone silent in the middle of the woods on the McGurk Meadow Trail, only to be found 2 years later in a pile of trash 30 miles from the scene of the tragedy. The circle has closed. On September 11, 2014, the work of forensic scientists in the Red Earth Zone entered the phase of detailed description of physical evidence. When the first wave of shock from the discovery of the body had passed, investigators focused on the contents of the trailer and shed. What they saw inside resembled the burrow of a giant rodent pest that pulls everything that lies badly to itself. The premises were literally crammed with things stolen from cars, tourist tents, and campsites over the past 5 to 6 years. Among the piles of dirty clothes, old newspapers, and rusty spare parts, the detectives found a real archive of other people's lives. The cardboard boxes contained dozens of driver's licenses issued in different states, expired credit cards, broken digital cameras, portable navigators, sunglasses of famous brands, and even children's toys. Cross-checking the names from the found documents against the police database revealed a striking picture. Almost all of these people had filed reports of identity theft in the Yosemite National Park area and surrounding areas. This allowed behavioral analysts to instantly draw up an accurate psychological profile of the criminal. The owner of this lair was not a sophisticated serial maniac who preys on people for sadistic pleasure. He was a typical vulture, a professional amateur thief who had been parasitizing on the safety of tourists for years. He would clean out cars at viewpoints while the owners were taking pictures or steal backpacks left unattended near tents. His motive was always profit, and his psychology resembled the Plushkin syndrome. He could not part with even those things that had no value. Identifying the resident through the land cadaster proved to be an impossible task. The plot formerly belonged to a mining company that went bankrupt in the 90s, and the trailer itself was installed there illegally, without any permits or registration. However, his own sloppiness helped identify the criminal. Fingerprint experts found clear fingerprints on virtually every item in the trailer, on dirty cans of food, on tool handles, and crucially, on the inside of the plastic battery cover of Zach Paul's yellow walkie-talkie. The prints were uploaded to the National Automated Identification System and provided an instant match. The suspect was Curtis Ray Miller, 44 years old. He was a local resident with a troubled past and a long history of conflicts with the law. His criminal record was full of arrests for burglary, illegal possession of drugs, including methamphetamine, and malicious poaching. The last time he was detained was back in 2010, after which he stopped showing up at his place of residence and actually disappeared from the police radar, moving into an illegal hermit status. Further analysis of the found items allowed the investigation to reconstruct the events of that fateful day almost minute by minute. Deep in the piles of trash, the detectives found Zach's branded backpack. It had been cut open with a knife and gutted. All the electronics and valuables were gone, and only dirty clothes remained. They found the guy's leather wallet nearby. The cash was gone to the last cent, but the bank cards and student ID card remained in place. The criminal realized that using the cards would instantly give away his location. This finally confirmed the motive of the crime: a banal, brutal robbery. The investigation put forward the main version that explained everything. On that August day, Curtis Miller was probably scouring parking lots or remote trails in search of easy prey. He came across a lone hiker, Zach. The blind man seemed to be the perfect target, defenseless and weak. Miller did not plan the murder from the beginning. He probably demanded the backpack, but Zach, not seeing the attacker, could have tried to use the radio to call his father. This movement provoked the perpetrator. Fear of being exposed and drug aggression pushed him to kill the witness. As for the dog, everything was also explained by cold pragmatism, not mercy. Miller did not take Barney away because he felt sorry for the animal. The purebred golden retriever could have been worth a lot of money on the black market, or more likely, the criminal decided to use him as a free alarm to guard his warehouse of stolen goods in the middle of nowhere. He simply turned a friend into a tool. On September 12th, the sheriff of Mariposa County signed an arrest warrant for Curtis Ray Miller on charges of first-degree murder. The task force was ready for the arrest, but Miller was no longer in the trailer. While inspecting the kitchen, the detectives noticed an uneaten breakfast on the table covered in mold. The condition of the food indicated that the owner had left the home in a hurry about 2 days before the police arrived. The timeline perfectly coincided with the dog's appearance at Glacier Point. Barney's escape was a wake-up call for Miller. He realized that if the dog got to people, its chip or special signs would lead the police directly to the dead zone. Fearing exposure, he abandoned all his belongings, got into his car, and fled. From that moment on, the local search operation turned into a large-scale manhunt that covered the entire territory of the state of California. On September 13, 2014, the situation at the Mariposa County Sheriff's Office reached a boiling point. After the discovery of the body and identification of the suspect, the investigation moved into an active pursuit phase. That same morning, Curtis Ray Miller was officially placed on a federal wanted list. Operational descriptions with his photo, a 4-year-old prison mugshot of him looking at the camera with a heavy, gloomy look, were sent to all patrol crews in the state of California. The description paid special attention to his vehicle. It was an old Chevy Silverado pickup truck made in 1998, dark gray in color, with a characteristic deep dent in the left rear fender and peeling paint on the hood. The investigators who were drawing up the fugitive's psychological profile knew exactly who they were dealing with. Miller was not a brilliant strategist or a professional criminal capable of hiding from justice for years. He was a drug addict with a shattered psyche who acted on impulse and fear. The escape of his dog Barney made him panic. Leaving his trailer in the Red Earth Zone, he had effectively lost his only base, his food supply, and a warehouse of stolen goods that he could have exchanged for cash. Now he was a hunted animal who urgently needed money for fuel and a dose, and it was this need that was to become his fatal mistake. The detective's prediction came true the very next morning. On September 14th, at exactly 10 o'clock, the automated bank transaction monitoring system issued a red alert. In the small town of Oakhurst, 40 miles south of the criminal's abandoned lair, someone had attempted to use a Visa credit card. This card had been stolen from a couple of tourists just a week ago, and its details were already in the database of recent episodes. The operatives immediately contacted the owner of the gas station where the payment attempt took place and seized the CCTV footage. The grainy image confirmed the hunch. A man with a dirty baseball cap pulled over his eyes was standing near the terminal. He was looking around nervously, trying to fill up the same gray pickup truck. The banking system rejected the transaction due to suspicious activity. Realizing that the card was blocked and that this could attract attention, Miller quickly got into his car and sped away. Cameras captured him driving northbound, trying to get onto Highway 140. Police immediately organized a large-scale interception plan codenamed The Ring. Analysts understood the fugitive's logic. He was trying to leave the mountainous terrain where local rangers knew him and disappear into the crowded Central Valley, where it was easier to get lost among thousands of cars. Patrol crews blocked the main exits from the park area, setting up checkpoints at key intersections. On September 15th, around 2 in the afternoon, the junction came. A patrol officer on duty along the Merced River Highway in the Briceburg area spotted the familiar silhouette of a pickup truck. The vehicle was parked on a dirt off-ramp, partially hidden behind willow bushes. The hood of the Chevy was up, and white steam was billowing out from under it. The old, worn-out engine could not withstand the load and overheated in the 40-degree heat. It was an irony of fate. The equipment failed the criminal just when he was only miles away from freedom. The seizure team acted with lightning speed, but cautiously. The officers approached the car with their weapons at the ready, expecting anything. But the arrest went off without a shot being fired. Curtis Miller, who was digging into the hot engine to fix the cooling system, was so focused and at the same time inhibited that he did not even notice the police approaching. He didn't have time to take out a large hunting knife hanging from his belt in a leather sheath. The man looked miserable, exhausted, covered in fuel oil and road dust. He was in a state of deep drug intoxication. When the handcuffs clicked on his wrists, he did not resist, just looked indifferently at the ground. During an urgent search of the pickup truck, the interior of which was littered with bags of garbage, food scraps, and dirty clothes, detectives found a crucial piece of evidence. This finding finally and irrevocably tied Miller to the case of the missing blind boy. Under the driver's seat, among the empty bottles, was an object that took even experienced cops' breath away. It was not a stolen camera or a piece of jewelry. It was an old, worn leather harness for a guide dog with distinctive metal carabiners and a rigid arc. Miller, in his cynical pragmatism, used this specialized tool that had once been a guide for a blind man as a regular tow rope to secure loads in the back of a pickup truck. The leather was covered with scratches and grease stains, but the official inscription embossed on the center insert could still be read. Guide dogs for the blind. Guide dogs for the blind. Curtis Miller was taken to the Mariposa County Jail under heavy guard. He remained silent throughout the trip, refusing to answer the officers' questions. But his silence no longer mattered. The body of evidence was overwhelming. His fingerprints on the victim's disassembled radio, microparticles of red clay from the gravesite on his shoes, and most importantly, the harness of his faithful dog Barney found in his car. These silent witnesses spoke much louder than any confession, painting a complete picture of the crime. On September 16, 2014, the atmosphere in Interrogation Room 3 of the Mariposa County Sheriff's Office was electrifying. Curtis Ray Miller was sitting at a table, handcuffed to a metal bracket in the floor. Opposite him were two lead detectives, and a camera in the corner of the ceiling recorded the suspect's every move. It was the moment of truth that had been waiting for 2 years. The first 2 hours of interrogation were like a game of cat and mouse. Miller, with his extensive experience in dealing with law enforcement, chose a strategy of complete denial of the crime. He tried to convince investigators of the bystander version. According to his first words, he was just walking in the woods, found an abandoned backpack, and decided to take it for himself, and picked up the dog that was wandering nearby out of pity. He claimed that he had never seen Zach Paul and had no idea how the boy died. Miller was defiant, demanding proof and insisting that looting was not murder. The turning point came when the senior detective silently laid a series of photographs on the table. They showed a disassembled yellow radio found in his shed. The investigator slowly explained. Experts found Miller's clear fingerprints not on the outside of the case, which could confirm the version of the discovery, but inside, on the contacts of the battery compartment. This meant that he had deliberately disassembled the device. This indisputable fact destroyed his defense. Miller realized that the found version no longer worked. His gaze faded, his shoulders slumped, and he changed tactics. He began to speak, trying to reduce his guilt from premeditated murder to involuntary manslaughter. His story, recorded in the interrogation transcript, was striking in its mundanity and brutality. According to Miller, on August 14, 2012, he was in the area of Glacier Point Road. His target was tourist cars left in remote parking lots, but that day the catch was scanty. Moving between trails, he spotted Zach Paul. Miller admitted that at first he didn't even realize he was looking at a blind person. He saw only a lonely young man with an expensive hiking backpack, walking without company. For an experienced criminal, this looked like easy prey. He decided to just take the valuables and disappear. According to the report, Miller met Zach less than half a mile from where the search party later found the abandoned stick. He blocked the trail and demanded his backpack in a rude manner. Zach, unable to see his attacker, but hearing the aggression in his voice, instinctively grabbed for the radio hanging from his backpack to call his father. This move proved fatal. Miller, being under the influence of drugs and fearing exposure, reacted instantly. In his hand, he had a heavy metal tire iron that he used to pick car door locks. He struck the boy one hard blow. Miller talked about it in a calm, monotone voice, saying that things didn't go according to plan. When he realized what he had done and saw that the victim showed no signs of life, his fear of prison outweighed everything else. He dragged the body into the dense bushes, returned to his pickup truck, and drove it as close to the trail as possible, taking advantage of the temporary absence of other tourists. A separate set of questions concerned the dog's behavior. Detectives could not understand why the big dog did not protect its owner. Miller's explanation was simple and tragic at the same time. Barney was a certified guide dog. He had been trained for years to trust people, be obedient, and never show aggression. He did not know how to bite. When Zach fell, the dog just stayed by his side, whining and nuzzling his owner's hand. Miller took advantage of this gullibility. He threw the body into the back of the car and dragged the dog into the car, tying him down with a tow rope he found in the car. He was afraid that if he left the dog behind, it would run to the people and lead them directly to the crime scene. Upon arriving at the Red Earth Zone, Miller disposed of the body in the simplest way possible. He threw it into a ravine and covered it with construction waste and earth. He initially planned to kill the dog, but noticed that the animal was obedient and did not cause problems, and decided to keep it. His logic was purely utilitarian. The dog could bark if someone else approached his hiding place. He gave it the name Jack and put it on a chain near the barn, feeding it the cheapest food once a day. Thus, the guide dog turned into a killer's watchdog. When asked by the investigator how Barney escaped, Miller responded with undisguised irritation. According to him, it was due to his own negligence. A few days ago, he forgot to check an old iron carabiner on a chain that had rusted from time and rain. The dog must have felt some kind of call or just pulled hard, and the mechanism broke. Miller claimed that he did not know that the dog had taken the bone. He assumed that the hungry dog, left unattended, began digging in the ground next to the kennel, dug up the shallow grave of its real owner, instinctively took a part of his, and ran to where his memory kept the memories of home, the Yosemite Mountains. The interrogation ended with a full confession, which was recorded on video. At the end of this conversation, there was a detail that shocked even the hardened police officers. When the detectives asked what Miller had taken from the victim's backpack, he listed old clothes he had thrown away, $20 in cash he had spent on gas, and 4 AA batteries from the same yellow radio. He used them for his pocket flashlight. The life of an 18-year-old boy ended because of $20 and a set of batteries. On February 3, 2015, an oppressive silence reigned in the Mariposa County Courthouse, broken only by the creaking of the wooden benches and the quiet whispers of those present. On this day, the case that had shocked the whole of California with its senseless cruelty was to be brought to a close. The trial of Curtis Ray Miller, despite the resonance of the crime, did not turn into a protracted legal battle. The evidence base collected by detectives and experts was so massive and irrefutable that the defense had virtually no room for maneuver. The results of DNA tests, ballistics expertise, a unique geological analysis of red clay, and finally, a video of the defendant's own confession created an iron cage around Miller before the verdict was passed. Realizing the hopelessness of the situation, the defendant's lawyer made a deal with the district attorney's office. In exchange for a guilty plea on all charges, the prosecutor's office agreed not to seek the death penalty, which is still a valid punishment in the state of California. Miller formally pleaded guilty to kidnapping, armed robbery, and first-degree aggravated murder. During the sentencing, Curtis Miller sat motionless in the dock, staring blankly at the tabletop in front of him. His face showed no emotion, no fear, no pity, no remorse. When the judge read out the verdict, the only sound in the room was the sobbing of the victim's mother. The verdict was as harsh as possible within the framework of the agreement reached. Life imprisonment in a maximum security prison without the possibility of parole. In his closing remarks, the prosecutor, addressing the jury and the victim's family, made a speech that was later published in all the newspapers. This man killed a defenseless man in cold blood for a set of used batteries and $20. And then, guided only by his own selfishness, he kept the only witness to this crime on a rusty chain for 2 years, hoping that the world would forget about them both. But the world did not forget, because loyalty was stronger than crime. For Zach's parents, Michael and Linda Paul, that day of trial was the final painful point in a 2-year nightmare of complete uncertainty. Although the killer's verdict could not bring their son back, they received what they had been longing for all these months, their child's body. Thanks to Miller's testimony and the map brought by the dog, Zach's remains were exhumed from a muddy pit in the Red Earth Zone. The family was able to bury him in his hometown, with all the honors befitting a human being, rather than leaving him in an unmarked grave among the garbage and oblivion. The fate of Barney, the golden retriever who became the protagonist of this tragic story, was both sad and touching. After his return from captivity, he was never able to work as a guide dog again. The veterinarians who took care of him diagnosed the animal with a whole bunch of chronic diseases. His joints had undergone irreversible changes due to prolonged tethering, poor nutrition, and extreme physical exertion during the escape. In addition to physical disabilities, the dog suffered from a severe form of post-traumatic stress disorder. Barney was terrified of loud noises, refused to enter tight spaces that reminded him of a kennel, and was anxious when left alone. Officially, he was discharged from the service, but he remained in the Paul family as a beloved pet dog. According to Michael Paul, the adaptation was difficult, but love helped heal the animal's emotional wounds. However, the dog never forgot his owner. In the first months after returning home, Barney would come to the closed door of Zach's room every night, lie down on the rug at the threshold, and wait quietly with his head on his paws. He lived in warmth, nourishment, and peace for 3 more years, surrounded by the care of the people to whom he had brought the truth. In 2017, the heart of the faithful dog stopped due to old age. The story of Zach Paul and his faithful friend changed security protocols in Yosemite National Park forever. The rules for monitoring lone tourists, especially people with disabilities, were revised, and control over suspicious persons in the reserve was strengthened. But for the local rangers who participated in the search, the case remained an eternal reminder that sometimes the laws of nature are more merciful and just than human actions. The dense forest took the young man away, but the same forest returned him, because of the incredible loyalty of the dog, who walked 30 miles through mountain passes on paws worn to blood. He carried not just a bone in his teeth, but his master's only chance for justice. The case, which had every chance of remaining forever in the missing persons folder, was solved not by brilliant detectives or the latest technology, but by the blind, boundless instinct of canine loyalty, which proved to be stronger than death.